And welcome. We are in 303 in Senior English A, and we are in our hymnals on pages 2 and 3 and following. I recommend that right now you be on those pages. Let's just look at 2 and 3 real quickly. I recommend that you have your annotations in front of you, and we are about to then work through the pages 2 through about 15 or so, okay? Now the objective here for us in Senior English A is to gain an understanding of a time period that will be introduced on page 2 and page 3 in what they call a snapshot of the period. And then if you'll turn over to page 4, and that's where we will officially begin now. On page 4, we are doing historical background work for a period called the Old English and medieval period. So right away, you want to write that down. The Old English and medieval periods. Notice your dates. We want to write that down. 449 to 1485. Okay? And Unit 1 of your senior book, then, is going to cover these two periods, called Old English and the medieval period. Now, the challenge for scholars is to actually have real good understandings of a time period so long ago. You'll notice then that your reading here has two parts. I hope you're looking with me at page 4, 5, 6, 7, and following. Notice that two parts of your book. First of all, there's the part down below. Do you see it? This is the timeline. Yes? So it's giving you some idea of the events that happened during time. It is set in, an important word, chronological order. What does that mean? We're going to start with our earliest years, notice 449, and we're going to go forward. Do you see it? Notice that we keep going forward with our timeline. Just flip through these pages quickly. We keep going with our timeline all the way up to page 13. Go ahead and look at it real quickly. All the way up to 13. And we finish with the year 1485. It makes a lot of sense for you as a senior, and especially for you as a college-bound student, to begin to pay attention to these events that we will call historical. Historical, meaning stuff that happened in the past during the time we call history. All right? And so you've got some information at the bottom of the page. Go back to page 4. At the top of the page, we have some information that's driven by headings. Do you see them? Headings. We have major and minor headings. As you read through these pages with me, you want to simply be doing two things. One, you want to be writing down these headings. Make sense? So if there's a heading in the volume, write it down. 2, we will read through the small passage under the heading, and you will want to write down at least 1 or 2 things from that passage, from that section, okay? We'll read it together. We'll actually work together through this reading, and I will be making suggestions for things that maybe you want to write down. Of course, you'll be handing this information in through your annotation packet as it is assigned to you. Let's go ahead now and turn to page 4. The historical background. You're reading with me. Now, if you're in Senior English A, most likely, this is, of course, one of your early classes in early readings in Senior English. And so we're really already focusing on our reading. Your job while you're reading with me is to follow along. Really try to do your best job to keep up with my reading speed by following with the tip of your pen or pencil to make sure that you can keep up. If you can't keep up, if you keep falling behind, if you cannot stay up with my reading speed, then you have challenges with what we call reading fluidity. And we need to help you in terms of becoming a more fluid, quicker, you might think of, faster, better reader. And so your job is to come and speak to me in private about the fact that I can't quite keep up with some of the stuff that you're reading here. We will have some vocabulary words that maybe are a little demanding, and when we hit those, we'll maybe try and pause. Let's go ahead then and begin our reading on page 4 with the Old English and medieval periods, 449 to 1485. They came to conquer and stayed to build. First, it was the Romans in AD 43 who drove the original Celtic inhabitants of Britain into the north, Scotland and West Wales of the island. Then in AD 449, after the last Roman troops had been summoned home to defend Rome against the barbarian invaders, a group of Germanic tribes, the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes, crossed the North Sea and occupied the island the Romans had called Albion. In a short time, Angleland became England. Now, if you flip back really quickly to page 3, you will see there a map. A map. Go ahead and look at it real quickly with me. Of England. Notice England is the little rock there, island, from which all kinds of people are going to invade. From your reading now thus far, we just simply want to make a couple of quick observations. One, I would be writing this down now as we go. One, obviously you're going to write down that the Romans had a huge part to play in early England. By the way, just to remind, why are we messing with England? Because we are in a British literature course, right? And British and England will become synonymous terms for us down the line. We're actually going to learn where this term England comes from. By the way, why do we got to learn about England if we are Americans? Answer. The early Americans came from England, and they spoke English. To that degree, America then is going to speak a language that is a byproduct of England. So we will study English language and literature to understand our own kind of cultural roots in America. Let's go back and point out that the Romans first come about AD after death, 43 years after the death of Christ, okay? And then in 449 are brought back home. Now, often we'll talk about 410, this is the fall of Rome, but by 449, here they come, back to Rome, leaving England isolated and open for invasion. The invasion of England was by 3 primary Germanic tribes. So in other words, let's write this down in our notes really quickly. Early English people actually come in large measure from Germany tribes. Notice you have 3 of them listed. The Angles, the Saxons, and the Utes. Okay? These Jutes or Utes will cross the North Sea, and they will come ultimately to an island that was called by the Germans Albion, but ultimately called Angleland, and then ultimately England. All right, let's keep reading. Your next heading is invasion, settlement, and assimilation. To assimilate means to come together. You might write that down. Assimilation. To assimilate means to come together. All right, let's go ahead and go to work with this. The next incursion, AD 597, was more peaceful, led by the Roman cleric St. Augustine. He and his followers converted to Christianity the pagans who were there. The Bible of these Christians was written in Latin, and they brought Latin learning with them. So let's write down a couple of things here really quickly. Christianity will have a tremendous influence in England, coming from, first of all, St. Augustine and the Bible in Latin. The language, Latin, is a dead language today. By that we mean no one speaks it anymore other than academically, okay? But back in the day, it was the language of the Romans, all right? In the 8th century, the Danes arrived. I would write that down. The Danes arrived in the 8th century. At first, they raided and looted the towns and monasteries of the North Seas, but eventually they settled that area in 871. When they tried to overrun the rest of the island, they were stopped by Alfred the Great. I'd write this date down, 871, and Alfred the Great, who is now considered the first king of England. So I would write that down. If it ends up on the exam, you are ready for that information. Okay? Alfred the Great, 871, considered the first great king of England. The Danes too converted, assimilated, and gave us words like sky, skill, and skate. These words all coming from the land of the Danes, later Denmark. The last successful invasion of England occurred in 1066. That's an important date. We want to write that date down. 1,000 years after the death of Christ, we will have now the last invasion. Okay? The Duke of Normandy in France claimed and won the throne. So let's write it down. 1066 is the date we give to the invasion of the French, the Normans. Known as William the Conqueror. That's an important name. Let's write it down. He brought his court, his language, French language, to the country he seized. For some time, England was a bilingual country of conquerors and conquered. So let's write this down. For a long time now in England, you're going to have a bilingual kind of country where we're going to have French being spoken, right, alongside English. In his novel Ivanhoe, which is set in the Middle Ages, the 19th century writer Sir Walter Scott captures this duality. Animals are swine, oxen, and calves on the hoof, but pork, beef, and veal in the kitchen of the noble lord. Even today, we will make a last will and testament, repeating the same meaning in Anglo-Saxon and Norman French, respectively. Let's keep going. Page 5. The feudal era, 1100 to 1485. You want to write that down. The feudal era, 1100 to 1485. When we return, we will come back to be working now with this date section, okay?